Alright, you've watched Season 1 of Ben 10. You're thinking to your little kid self, wow, that was pretty amazing. I love this show. Life is good. You hit it big. You're telling all your friends at school about this awesome new show you watched, trying to rope them into your new favorite franchise perhaps? Life can't get much better than this. But little did you know, your parents were hatching the perfect scheme behind your back, because your birthday is coming soon, or Christmas even. And you know what that means? Hello everyone, TheAwesomeAlan here, and today we're going to talk about Season 2 of Ben 10 and how it builds on the greatness that was Season 1. They did the impossible. Lightning struck twice. If you haven't seen Part 1, the link is in the description, and before we get into the good stuff, I wanted to touch up on a few points that I left out of my previous video covering Season 1, which is a point that a few of you guys brought up as well. The main point being that, well, yes, Man of Action did create the franchise and had a huge role in setting the foundations of what would become Ben 10 as we know it. I only alluded to other crew members who worked on the show as well in the previous video, and it'd be more fair to outright recognize them. I was remiss to exclude the tremendous amount of contributions that writers Greg Klein and Tom Pugsley brought to the show, having written some of the more memorable episodes of Season 1, like And Then There Were 10 and Kevin 11. It's also many of their ideas from the first season that translate into the overarching stories that we see later in the show, so it's very important to acknowledge their contributions and give credit where it's due. They'd also go on to write many more memorable episodes and stories, but we'll get to those later. On top of the writers, I have to include artists Dave Johnson and Thomas Perkins, with Dave Johnson creating the iconic designs of the original 10 aliens, and Thomas Perkins coming in as an assistant character designer as of Season 2, eventually taking over as art director when Dave Johnson left for Season 3. These two artists, but Dave Johnson specifically for at least Season 1, have had a huge impact on the franchise as a whole, and it's their iconic artwork and designs that are considered one of the highlights of the show and contribute heavily into what most fans probably enjoy more than anything, the aliens. Keeping that in mind, there are of course many moving parts in productions like this, and a huge amount of credit goes to every individual person who worked on the show. Without their efforts, we of course would not have Ben 10 as we know it, and it's important to remember that there's a lot of work that goes into projects like this, and it's absolutely a collaborative team effort. I wanted to go more in-depth in the Season 1 analysis like this, but for the sake of time and pacing, I kept it pretty simple. Let me know in the comments if you guys are interested in a more in-depth and behind-the-scenes look at the episodes, and let me know what kind of videos you guys would like to see in the future outside of the franchise retrospectives. I have a lot of ideas in mind with a few scripts already written, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and ideas. And while you're down there, why not like the video and subscribe? I give you content, you give me subscription, bada bing, bada boom, we're all happy in the end. With that said, let's get into the good stuff. We start off Season 2 of Ben 10 with the episode Truth, which is thematically and literally a direct continuation of Season 1's finale, Secrets, taking place just later that night after Vilgax's attack on Ben. It starts with a flashback of a younger Grandpa Max and one of his encounters with a younger Vilgax back in the 1970s, which also gives us our first look at the Plumbers, an organization that Grandpa Max had briefly mentioned in the previous episode. We're also introduced to Grandpa Max's partner, Phil, as they both work to take down Vilgax. This sequence serves two purposes, detailing the backstory and history between Grandpa Max and Vilgax that was hinted at throughout the previous season, a season-long mystery that continued to build with every episode, along with giving us a glimpse at what the Plumbers are. We don't know much about them yet, but we know that they've had encounters with Vilgax and use a lot of high-tech equipment, along with a massive underground base hidden within Mount Rushmore.
We called ourselves the Plumbers. Officially, we didn't exist. We were the guys who fixed the problems no one else could.
This flashback is actually present-day Grandpa Max recounting his experience with Vilgax to Ben and Gwen, and he explains that the Plumbers were a secret organization that were designated with protecting the planet from things that were extraterrestrial, extrasensory, and extraordinary, basically lumping aliens into a category of monsters and mystical threats. If there was anything out of the ordinary, the Plumbers were tasked with putting an end to it. Max also explains that while he does have a history fighting aliens, he knew very little about the Omnitrix and was surprised when it appeared during the first episode. The group eventually encountered Grandpa Max's old partner, Phil, who has been working as a kind of mercenary that hunts down aliens that have been popping up locally. As more and more aliens keep appearing and Phil is there to take them all down, Max begins growing suspicious. Grandpa Max heads to the Plumber facility at Mount Rushmore, and it's there that he finds a very specific piece of tech is missing. The Null Void Projector. The Null Void Projector is one of the staples of the Ben 10 universe going forward, with its inclusion appearing again and again throughout the story. The Null Void is sort of a pocket dimension that exists outside of the known universe. It's a very dangerous place as much of the galaxy's criminals and dangerous creatures are sent there as a form of imprisonment and punishment. We find out that back during their years as plumbers, Max and Phil had sent countless aliens here as a part of their methods of getting rid of aliens on the planet. The Null Void Projector is a device that can create a portal into that dimension, and Max discovers that Phil has been using it to release aliens back onto Earth, where he then conducts a scheme of being paid to recapture them. The gang are able to stop Phil in his tracks, and by the end of the episode, they end up imprisoning him inside of the Null Void, an ironic fate given the circumstances. We also get to see another one of Ben's aliens appearing on Earth, the Vulpamancers, which are the species of Wildvine. As for some trivia about the episode, Phil is actually voiced by Robert Patrick, who is probably most known for his role in Terminator 2 Judgment Day as the antagonist, the T-1000 Terminator. Recently, however, he played the villain White Dragon in DC's Peacemaker and was phenomenal in that as well. While on the subject of voice actors, I want to take a quick break and look back at a few of them and a few characters thus far that I probably should have mentioned in the first video, my bad. But at the end of the day,
I'm only human.
Grandpa Max is voiced by Paul Eiding, who has been in a countless number of animated shows, along with some extremely notable and successful video game titles. For instance, one of the first times I had heard his voice outside of Ben 10 or animation would be when I played Fallout 3 for the first time, after which he returned for even more voice acting in Fallout 4. He remains the voice actor for Grandpa Max all the way through to Ben 10 Omniverse, so we'll be hearing a lot of him in the foreseeable future. Gwen is voiced by Megan Smith, or Megan Capone, or Megan Moore. Okay, well, she has gone by a few different stage names, and there isn't too much known about her outside of a few appearances in film and television. From what I can gather, her role as Gwen Tennyson is one of her more notable performances, with her even coming back to voice Gwen again in the animated film Ben 10 Destroy All Aliens, several years after the original show ended. Ben is, as most of you probably know, voiced by Tara Strong, who has honestly been a huge part of everyone's childhood. Timmy Turner, Harley Quinn, Raven, Batgirl, Bubbles, Omi, Ben Tennyson. I mean, her career is boundless, and that's just a small sample of notable performances, and I'm pretty sure she has a role for everyone regardless of what type of show you were watching. In the past few years, she's also made her MCU debut as Miss Minutes in Loki, and more recently as Mainframe in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. For the villains, I'll go over a few notable ones, but I'll elaborate on any I've missed later once or if they reappear, just for the sake of time. Kevin was voiced by Michael Reis in Season 1, who is actually a retired voice actor who shifted his career into writing and producing. Starting with Season 2, Kevin is voiced by Charlie Schlatter, who played the Flash in several DC animated shows, as well as leading his own show as Kick Buttowski, amongst many other roles. I'm going to be honest, until rewatching the episodes for this video and listening to the episodes so soon after his previous appearance, I never noticed this, and I can't believe it took me all these years to discover that Kevin's voice actor actually changed. Let me know if any of you guys noticed this, because I definitely didn't, and I've rewatched this show a countless number of times and never noticed it apparently. Velgax is voiced by Steve Blum, another voice acting icon whose notable roles include Wolverine in almost every animated or video game appearance, Spike Spiegel in Cowboy Bebop, Green Goblin in Spectacular Spider-Man, Zeb from Star Wars Rebels and The Mandalorian, amongst many, many others. Whether it be Western animation or dubbing characters in countless anime, and with hundreds of voice acting credits, he and Tara Strong are veterans of voice acting and helped shape many franchises with their iconic talent. With Steve Blum in mind, let's go over the various voice actors for the aliens that Ben has access to. Heat Blast and Ghostfreak are voiced by Steve Blum, Wildmutt and Stingfly are voiced by D. Bradley Baker, Diamond Head and Accelerate are voiced by Jim Ward, Grey Matter is voiced by Richard Horvitz, Forearms is voiced by Richard McGonigal, Ripjaws is voiced by Fred Tatasciore, and lastly, Upgrade is of course voiced by Tara Strong. This diverse and wide array of voice actors for the aliens make every single one feel unique and special. Even those that share voice actors are different enough for you to not even catch it at first, or at all. All the voice actors I've mentioned thus far, along with all the others that have contributed to the show, definitely left an impact and are just one of the many moving parts that make this show so memorable. The next episode, The Big Tick, changed Ben 10 forever. As I mentioned at the end of the last video, I remember when I first saw the trailer for this episode and I went wild. Ben 10 gets an 11th alien. That is unheard of. It breaks the mold. That's not supposed to happen. It's in the title, Ben 10, 10 aliens. But, big surprise, a brand new alien appears, an event that will occur throughout the rest of the franchise as Ben's roster continues to grow more expansive. After messing with the Omnitrix, Ben and Gwen accidentally unlock Ben's 11th alien. Adding on to his performance as Ripjaws, Fred Tatasciore additionally voices Cannonbolt, a large alien with a yellow shell and armor spread across his body. The white part of his body is actually short fur, and with the addition of his claws, he almost resembles an alien panda of sorts. After trying to learn Cannonbolt's power, a meteor crashes on the planet, which is then revealed to be a giant alien tick called the Great One, which burrows itself into the planet, terraforming and destroying it from the inside out. The main point of this episode is to just throw Ben out of his comfort zone, with Cannonbolt not appearing very useful on the surface, and because of this, Ben tries relying on his previous 10 aliens to destroy the Great One, but it has an impenetrable shell that his aliens just aren't matching up to. It's then when he's able to use Cannonbolt's new powers to save the day, with Cannonbolt being able to curl into an armored ball and shoot himself around like a pinball, or, you know, a cannonball.
Actually, make that a cannonbolt!
Oh, okay, fine. Cannonbolt's biggest strength is to propel himself forward at great speeds, using his shell to both protect him and deal a lot of damage to anything in his path. Taking Ben out of his comfort zone for once with a new alien was great to see, and there will actually be a few more instances of this throughout the season as we move forward. I do want to mention though that this episode is kind of harsh towards Ben at the end, since he's forced to clean the Great One's mess off of the rust bucket while Gwen and Max just sit there and enjoy his suffering. A bit weird since Ben really didn't do anything bad in this episode to provoke it, but I guess we could just say that it was payback for all of the antics in the previous season. Fun fact, Cannonbolt was going to be a part of the original 10 aliens, but was ultimately replaced with Diamond Head in the roster, which is a decision I'm very much glad they went with. I mean, obviously I love Diamond Head, but don't get me wrong, I love Cannonbolt too. Cannonbolt actually used to be one of my favorite aliens alongside Diamond Head, especially because he was the first new alien. It was very impactful for me, and since we also get to see alien fusions this season, now that I think about it, maybe my name should be Diamond Bolt. Actually, that kind of sounds familiar, but surely no one else had that same idea, right? The season continues to hit its stride with the third episode, Framed. So far, we've had an episode dedicated to Grandpa Max's backstory and fleshing out the world, an episode dedicated to an entirely new alien, and now an episode that reintroduces one of Ben's most iconic villains, Kevin 11, and cranks the stakes up even higher. In the episode, Ben's aliens are running amok and committing crimes. Gwen and Grandpa Max witness this firsthand when Forearms robs a video game store, and so they accuse Ben of using the Omnitrix for criminality and are completely confused by his behavior. Ben has no idea what they're talking about, and when shown evidence of Forearms' attack on the news, he of course tries to defend himself. As mentioned previously, Kevin 11 has returned, and since absorbing the Omnitrix's energy in his previous appearance, he's now able to transform into exact copies of Ben's aliens, uniform and all, allowing him to impersonate Ben and utilize each of his aliens' abilities and powers. We get really cool visual effects and animations of Kevin switching between the various aliens on the fly, and it always looks incredible, although a bit painful looking. It's using these powers that Kevin has been on a string of crimes and attacks that he wants to frame Ben for, causing his alien heroes to be seen in a negative light and overall tarnishing the good work that Ben has been doing. On top of that, Kevin is being hunted by a government organization known as SACT, the Special Alien Containment Team, and he plans on getting Ben captured by them instead as revenge, along with ruining his reputation. Kevin also reveals that due to him absorbing the Omnitrix, although he's able to transform into Ben's aliens, he can only stay human for a short amount of time before forcibly transforming back into aliens again, hinting at the instability of his powers when combined with the Omnitrix's energy. Kevin of course blames Ben for this as well, fueling his hatred even further. Throughout the episode, the SACT agents continue to target Ben even though Kevin is the one they really want. But of course, they don't know that, leading to Ben and Kevin having one final climactic battle on the Golden Gate Bridge with SACT in pursuit. As the episode winds to a close and Ben is finally able to get the upper hand on Kevin, he refuses to finish the fight and walks away, stating that Kevin isn't really worth the trouble or the effort. This enrages Kevin to an insane degree, causing him to uncontrollably transform into a monstrous alien abomination, a mutated amalgam of all 10 of Ben's aliens that he had originally absorbed with no ability whatsoever to change out of this form or revert back into his human self.
Can't change back! I'm stuck like this! Look at what you've done!
In the ensuing fight, Kevin is almost able to defeat even Forearms in physical combat, proving just how strong he really is with the combined powers of all of his aliens. But thanks to an intervention from one of the SACT agents, Lieutenant Steele, he's defeated and falls into the ocean below, taken care of once again. For now. Lieutenant Steele acknowledges Forearms as the good alien and lets him go, never discovering his true identity, even though he was suspicious of the Tennysons throughout the episode. This episode continued directly from the events seen in Kevin's previous appearance, and the culmination of this plot into Kevin mutating is one of the best stories in all of the original series. It's such a unique and interesting idea that can only exist when built off even more unique and interesting ideas. And while Kevin was able to rival Ben before by stealing his powers, he now has all of the powers of the original 10 in one combined monstrous form. The design for Kevin's mutant form is also incredible, with mishmashed parts from every alien visible on his body. No alien is left out, and it's amazing. Also, real quick, I'm gonna play his theme in the background while I talk about it. This theme plays immediately after Kevin's transformation and is used in the video game Ben 10 Protector of Earth. It also appears a couple more times when Kevin is on screen. While he doesn't exactly have an official theme, this one is very ominous and foreboding, and I think it fits this interpretation of Kevin perfectly, especially after he's mutated. All in all, this episode is one of the best that the original series has to offer, which is fitting because the finale of this season, which also happens to involve Kevin, is in my opinion one of the best, if not the very best episode of the entire franchise, and is my favorite episode ever of Ben 10. But we'll cross that Golden Gate Bridge when we come to it. I like to think the theme of this season is pushing Ben outside of his comfort zone, at least for the first half. It's a theme that runs through most episodes, especially this next one, even if it's not canon.
Time. Space. Reality. It's more than a linear path.
In the episode Gwen 10, we see a what-if scenario where Gwen finds the Omnitrix instead of Ben, and what that could look like in its own isolated story. We see Gwen 10 versions of Heat Blast, Gray Matter, Diamond Head, and Forearms, although off-screen it's mentioned that Gwen also turned into Upgrade, Ripjaws, and Accelerate. And before getting into the plot, I'll once again cover some notable voice actors. Gwen's Forearms and Diamond Head are voiced by Vanessa Marshall, Heat Blast is voiced by Gray DeLise, and Gray Matter is voiced by Carrie Walgren, who also happens to voice Charmcaster for the remainder of the franchise, but we'll get to her later. The episode serves as a kind of recap of Season 1, rather than just the single day of getting the Omnitrix like we saw back during the pilot. So I feel like there was ample opportunity to give a quick montage of all 10 aliens, just to see what their designs would look like in Gwen's hands. I can see why they didn't, most likely due to time constraints, but because we didn't see this alternate universe again during the original series, it just felt like a huge, almost unsatisfied opportunity. Also, because Ben's aliens don't have hair, it is a bit weird that some of Gwen's aliens have her hair. I can understand it from a differentiating perspective, just trying to throw in differences to make their design stand out more, but it ultimately makes them feel a bit off and breaks the established rules that have been set up by Ben's aliens. Which, to be fair, there aren't that many rules at play, it's just that with what we've seen with Gwen, we definitely didn't see with Ben. For example, here's a few edits from Bang, one of our Discord members. He's been a part of my community since the beginning, and for this video, he's made a few designs that give an alternate look to Gwen's transformations. I especially like the forearms change simply because it's more in line with what a female Tetraman looks like as shown in a later episode, and it gets rid of the bright orange hair, which, again, isn't really how the Omnitrix works from what we've seen with Ben. Without being too focused on and negative about what we didn't get, what we did get was pretty great all the same, and the scenario was a really fun one. The plot basically retreads a lot of the pilot episode with a mix of the Season 1 finale because in this alternate scenario, Vilgax's injury never occurs, and he's able to immediately pursue the Omnitrix after just a few failed attempts by his drones. After defeating Vilgax once again, this time the power surge that caused Ben's Omnitrix to malfunction back during the other version of this episode actually causes the Omnitrix to detach itself from Gwen this time around, and as the anticipation builds just as Ben's about to get the Omnitrix back, it lands directly on Grandpa Max's wrist.
No!
We only see Grandpa Max transform into Upgrade, and this design is even more disappointing since it's literally just Ben's Upgrade, but with Max's voice. I guess it kind of makes sense that Upgrade's design is a bit more universal since he's more of a living machine and kind of artificial, but that doesn't mean it needs to look the exact same, and this was definitely most likely due to time constraints and budget. Still, Bang made another edit for this video of what his design could look like, and I prefer this one a lot more. I have absolutely no reason to be biased. To wrap up the episode, I should also mention that, weirdly enough, Ben actually has all of his memories from the show thus far, and so this isn't just a simple alternate reality story, but more like our Ben being placed into an alternate reality. This doesn't stick, however, as things go right back to normal as of the next episode, and Ben's memories are completely returned to normal. But this was a fun little side story in the meantime. The episode Grudge Match brings Kevin back once again, now cementing his place as a recurring villain and his powers as a mutated combination of Ben's aliens. His previous 2 appearances were all very story-centric and had a lot of momentum in terms of plot, so this one is the first episode with him that feels a bit slower by comparison. That isn't a bad thing, but it's definitely more of a side story compared to his previous episodes, and in this one we get a lot more Kevin screen time overall, so that's a plus. This is also the first time where Kevin's powers in this form are explained a bit more, so I'll mention that here. While Kevin does have the abilities of Ben's aliens, they're all only 1/10 as strong as they should be. 10 alien powers, but they're all diluted in the process due to being combined in such a way. Add Kevin's own powers on top of that and you have 11 powers. Although I would say that all of his powers are only 1/11th of their original strength since we're including Kevin's own powers, but the show itself says 1/10, so I'm just basing it off that. While engaged in a fight, Ben and Kevin are abducted by an alien spaceship and placed into an arena where they'll act as spectacle and entertainment for an audience, forced to fight other competitors as warrior slaves and gladiators, which is very reminiscent of the plot from Planet Hulk, where the Hulk is forced into similar circumstances, which actually released a few months prior to this episode airing. I'm not sure how far in advance these episodes were produced or even how long it took to make an episode, so I don't think it's fair to say one definitely borrowed from the other, but it's most likely that when making this episode they took a bit of inspiration from the comic. It of course could just entirely be a coincidence. While making their escape, Ben is of course betrayed by Kevin, but Ben is able to use his newest alien, Cannonbolt, to surprise Kevin and turn the tide of the fight, abandoning Kevin on the ship in the process and returning to Earth. With Kevin abandoned on the ship, he's confronted by Technorg, a fellow prisoner and Detrovite from the planet Vulcan. Technorg has slowly gained a bond with Ben and began respecting him as well as helping him and Kevin escape throughout the episode. As of Kevin's betrayal, Technorg has some not so nice things to say or do to Kevin.
Please don't do this. You don't have to do this.
Yeah, unfortunately I do.
In the episode, the Galactic Enforcers were introduced to a team of alien superheroes who come to Earth pursuing a criminal named Vulcanus, who has teamed up with 6-6, one of the bounty hunters from the Season 1 episode Hunted, as they search for a rare metal on Earth that will help them build a high-tech bomb. The Galactic Enforcers consist of 3 members: Ultimos, a gray Superman-esque alien who leads the team and is allergic to chocolate; Tiny, a Tetraman warrior that I had hinted at earlier during the Gwen 10 episode; and Synaptek, an octopus-like alien that serves as the brains of the group, quite literally since his brain is visible. Ultimos is voiced by Tom Kane, who you've probably heard in countless other roles such as Yoda, Admiral Yularen, and the narrator in Star Wars The Clone Wars, Professor Utonium in the Powerpuff Girls, and Ultron in Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which I should cover one day. I love that show. Tiny is voiced by Vanessa Marshall, who voiced Gwen's forearms and Diamond Head transformations in the earlier episode, Mary Jane in Spectacular Spider-Man, and Wonder Woman on several occasions. Synaptek is voiced by Greg Ellis, who's most recognizable as Lieutenant Theodore Groves in Pirates of the Caribbean. This episode really touches on the superhero aspiration aspect of Ben's life, along with his own personal goals and ambitions. Comics, superhero movies, shows, cartoons, video games, these are all things that really defined Ben growing up, and from a meta standpoint, the show itself was inspired by much of what I just mentioned, so an episode diving into that really brings things full circle. What they do with the episode is really interesting though, because it gives Ben something of a reality check, with him realizing that being a superhero in the ways that he once dreamed of isn't exactly something he wants to adhere to, or is a mold that he doesn't quite fit into. And again, from a meta standpoint, this reigns true because Ben himself is a really unique spin on the superhero genre. He has no costume, no real superhero title aside from Ben 10, and as he gets older, his real identity is public knowledge, an antithesis of common superhero tropes. Ben is pretty rude towards Grandpa Max and Gwen throughout the episode, basically sidelining them in favor of real superheroes. But by the end of the episode, he acknowledges that he prefers working with them, and that they mean more to him than just being on a superhero team. Ben especially becomes estranged from the idea of being a typical superhero as he's presented with a long list of regulations and a massive rulebook that he would need to adhere to if he went down that path and joined their team. I also want to mention that the Galactic Code of Conduct does appear again in the future, but it less so applies to just the Galactic Enforcers and how they operate, and more so about the rules of the galaxy itself that many civilizations abide by. Of course, the later interpretation does still include the former, but its use in the episode is specifically to showcase how being an official superhero in the vein of the Galactic Enforcers is very limiting and rigid from Ben's perspective, who is much more free-spirited and off the cuff, and someone who really doesn't adhere to any specific way of handling things. He doesn't even really have a strict moral code of sorts or anything like that to guide him, since we see him kill or try to kill his enemies on several occasions, and he never bats an eye or lets it affect him. He's kind of a little superhero serial killer if you think about it. He's been playing a little too much Grand Theft Sumo Slam disclaimers, I think, but that's just my unprofessional analysis. And you know, I think I can speak for most people and say that we prefer Ben like this, someone who's more unique and doesn't adhere to typical superhero tropes. It makes him stand out more within the superhero genre, and that's just one of the many reasons we love him so much. In the episode Camp Fear, we're introduced to another alien, 2 in 1 season. Wildvine is a plant alien with a Venus flytrap protecting his head and explosive seeds on his back, and is Ben's very first plant alien. Also, short disclaimer, if you haven't noticed by now, I'm going by airing order for these. The production order of the episodes doesn't entirely come into play until Secret of the Omnitrix, and isn't really relevant again until Ultimate Alien and Omniverse, where the airing order is just... well, you could see what I mean. Wildvine is the 12th alien now available for Ben within the Omnitrix, but the number will continue to balloon with time. And while Cannonbolt may have been the trendsetter for getting new aliens, Wildvine's appearance is still incredible and a welcome addition to Ben's roster. Adding on to Jim Ward's talent as Diamond Head and Accelerate, he also voices Wildvine, and all I can say is the more Jim Ward we have, the better. In the episode, a large fungal hive mind, simply called the Mycelium, is rooted deep underground underneath a summer camp. After sending waves of mushroom monsters to drive away campers, it plans on growing exponentially and eventually consuming all life on the planet. So, Joel and Ellie, wrong fungus, got my notes mixed up. So, Ben is eventually captured by the Mycelium and, in an attempt to escape, uses the Omnitrix, but accidentally transforms into Wildvine for the first time. Wildvine is definitely an underrated alien, I think, and when asked what their favorite alien is, not too many people's immediate answer is Wildvine. He's not the best alien ever, but he's still really unique and has a lot more abilities than you'd assume just because he's a plant alien. As far as plant powers go, he's pretty versatile. I especially like the explosive pods that he has on his back, and combined with his traversal abilities thanks to his stretchy vines, he's a pretty agile and powerful alien in the atypical sense. As I said, definitely underrated, but an absolutely welcome addition to Ben's growing list of transformations. Funnily enough, unlike Cannonbolt's introductory episode, Wildvine isn't strictly essential to defeating the Mycelium and stopping its spread. To give him credit though, thanks to how the hive mind works as a fungus, Wildvine is able to hear and listen to the Mycelium, and that's how he figures out its master plan. But ultimately, it's Ben's own ingenuity that saves the day, using Athlete's foot powder to kill the hive mind along with using Stinkfly as a crop duster to kill any remaining spores in the area. The big lesson in this episode is getting Ben and Gwen on the same team, as the arguing between the two reaches a boiling point after fighting about their shared birthday on December 27th, which, of course, is the premiere day of the series and beginning of the franchise. A pretty neat little detail, and yes, it's never been outright confirmed that the date falls on the 27th, but there's a mountain's worth of evidence that points to this, especially with the episode aiming their birthday sometime at the end of the year. Anyway, since their birthday falls on the same day, they've always had to share the spotlight, so to speak. And while Ben and Gwen have had their fair share of arguments thus far in the story, this particular one pits them against each other in an extremely hostile way, with them continuing to fight all throughout the episode. It's this episode in particular that I think marks the shift in theme, going from taking Ben outside of his comfort zone to now focusing on familial relation. At the end of the episode though, they've reconciled their disagreement and even worked together in cleaning up the last remnants of the Mycelium. I honestly think that this kind of episode was needed, and for this season in particular is a very crucial plot to have, because while we've seen Ben and Grandpa Max at odds during the episode Kevin 11 back during season 1, we've had a general animosity between Ben and Gwen that's been boiling under the surface throughout the show that now finally gets a spotlight. It's the perfect setup for the end of the season, and even more so for the way their relationship has evolved once they get to the events of Secret of the Omnitrix, which I'm extremely excited to get to in the future. In the episode Ultimate Weapon, Grandpa Max goes Super Saiyan and learns the valuable lesson of paying for some anger management classes once in a while. The episode basically boils down to protecting an ancient artifact from the Forever Knights, and is one of the weakest episodes of the season in my opinion, mainly due to the strength of the other episodes. It's definitely not as far down as some of Season 1's weakest episodes, but I digress. However, I will start with the positives and say that this episode does continue the trend of fleshing out the world as a whole outside of the alien and sci-fi, this time covering ancient Mayan gods and artifacts. It also adds more dimension to the plumbers that originated in the classic series because, as Max explained previously, they've dealt with a wide assortment of threats, with aliens simply being the most notable. I actually really value this episode for that reason, and other episodes that tie into that general theme. As the franchise progresses, the world building becomes more and more flanderized and generalized to the point where quite literally everything ties into aliens to some degree or another, and it's really disappointing to see. So while in retrospect of the franchise, episodes like this ultimately don't lead to anything more in the future and are kind of retroactively written out, but that's not something I would mark points off this episode or the series for, but later shows instead. Grandpa Max learns that an ancient Mayan artifact has resurfaced and states that it's the key to a powerful and destructive weapon, the guide and map to an ancient sword that has the power to destroy cities. Grandpa Max gets real edgy here and shuts down Ben's excitement and awe of the sword. And don't worry guys, I'm right there with you. I know exactly what you're thinking. Yeah, Grandpa Max definitely is a Redditor. He also basically orders Ben around all episode, telling him to use the Omnitrix and has him going on stealth missions to get the mask. Even when Gwen tries reasoning with Max about how he's treating Ben, he scolds her as well, saying they're just kids. Alright Max, Ben I can understand. He's a little bit of a goof sometimes, but getting angry at Gwen for trying to stick up for Ben?
Look, I know it's our job to help this guy and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause.
Ben of course gets no thanks for helping Max break into the mask's location, and overall, Ben is just really defeated throughout the episode thanks to Max's treatment. I guess it's payback for letting him get shot in that alleyway back in New York. We even get to see Gwen trying to cheer him up, telling him that he's done a good job and everything. It's really sweet to see and makes it all the more painful that Max is treating him this way, less of a grandson and more of a tool to get what he wants. Enoch, voiced by Richard Doyle, makes things more complicated when he confronts the Tennysons and steals the mask, which just results in Max getting worse, even leaving Ben behind to almost die in a paper shredder as gray matter. Max, what is wrong with you? Wait, alright. I take it back, he's got some moves, he gets a pass. Also, rest in peace this Forever Knight in particular. Dude is wearing heavy plate armor and sinks deep into the water after falling off the bridge. This guy is dead, he drowned. Gwen just murdered this man after taking the fire extinguisher literally and causing him to drown in the ocean. This family is psychotic. And I can't get enough. Max continues to cause Ben and Gwen severe childhood trauma when Ben almost falls to his death with the Omnitrix timed out. But all Grandpa Max cares about is the mask. I mean, at this point, as much as I've really enjoyed this shakeup thus far, it's now riding the line of Max acting very uncharacteristically, and now you can start to tell why it's one of my least favorite episodes of the season. Putting the mask itself over Ben's well-being is something that I genuinely don't think he would ever do, and that's I guess where the episode starts to sour a bit in my eyes. It's very strong for the first half, then they really crank it up for the second half, but to a degree that's just too much. Ben and Gwen even acknowledge that he just isn't acting like himself, and we've seen the trio encounter Vilgax. We all know how serious and powerful he is, and what would happen if he had taken the Omnitrix. So seeing him treat this way more seriously and aggressively than he did in the Season 1 finale just doesn't make a lot of sense. Ben, as Forearms, tries to snap Grandpa Max out of whatever's going on with him, even yelling at him after Grandpa Max refuses to help Gwen.
Grandpa, I think Gwen needs a second to catch her breath.
No can do. Enoch may already have the sword.
Ever since that alarm went off, that sword is all you think about.
You two have to keep your eyes on the prize and remember what's important here.
We do remember. Do you?
It only took Max going insane to bring Ben and Gwen together, but at least they're showing how much they care about each other. If you haven't thrown up yet from this roller coaster ride bringing you up and down through 20 different loops, get this. The Mayan god of death, Apuk, appears and causes trouble for everyone involved. He's guarding the ultimate weapon that Max has been foaming at the mouth over, and after a fight between him and Forearms, Max ultimately chooses to save his grandkids and allows Enoch to finally get the sword. Problem is, it's 5,000 years old and completely turns to dust once removed from the temple. All of Grandpa Max's story in this episode has had the rug pulled out from under it, as the ultimate weapon was absolutely nothing to stress over and is now just dust in the wind. I mean, talk about subverting expectations. And, of course, Grandpa Max is back to his old self as if nothing had even happened. So, I mean, that's it. That's the whole episode. It's over. We did it. Grandpa Max faces no consequences. I usually reserve the lengthier discussions for the great episodes and quickly get through my least favorites. But this episode is just a really crazy one for all its ups and downs, especially regarding Max's behavior towards his grandkids. That's of course my opinion at least, so I apologize profusely to the Ultimate Weapon superfan out there that is currently harassing me in the comments. In the aftermath of Grandpa Max's war on compassion, during the episode Tough Luck, we're introduced to Charmcaster, who is, as mentioned earlier in the video, voiced by Carrie Walgren. We also get to see the return of Lucky Girl after the semi-retcon that I hinted at in the previous video, with the Charms of Bezel now having a new form in the Keystone of Bezel. The Keystone of Bezel increases the wearer's natural abilities. We see the return of Hex, voiced by Carrie Payton, one of my favorite actors of all time. You'll probably know him as Cyborg in Teen Titans, Aqualad in Young Justice, or even King Ezekiel from The Walking Dead, amongst so many other other notable roles. His voice is incredibly recognizable and was a big part of my childhood and most likely yours as well. Charmcaster frees Hex from prison and it's revealed that Hex is her uncle. They're after the Keystone of Bezel, which of course is now in Gwen's possession, who has readopted her lucky girl identity after finding the Keystone at a magic convention. In the future, I'm really going to miss the time where magic and fantasy in the show was just as mysterious and unexplained as the sci-fi and alien portions of the show. Obviously, it's great that the world building only gets bigger from here, but after one or two more shows, so much is explained and readily known by all the characters and by the audience, along with some of it being retconned, then not retconned again, that the wonder and luster of the ideas starts to fade away exponentially. I think the main cause of that, though, is the way that the future shows handle their respective world building compared to the original series, and not a single one of them is without fault. That's a much later issue we'll tackle, but one coming up even sooner than that, which is also a pretty big issue, is the quote-unquote alienization, or as I mentioned earlier, the Flanderization of the Ben 10 universe. We start out with aliens, magic, mythical creatures, monsters, and mutants, then we progress to pretty much only just aliens, with everything previously mentioned being retconned or translated into the theme of aliens, or at the very least, having aliens be the central focus and heightened to an insane degree during the storytelling. It's an overwhelming mess that, ironically, makes the world feel much smaller as they attempt to make it much larger, and I'll try and untangle that later down the road, but what I'm really trying to say is that I appreciate this show in particular for allowing these individual aspects of the universe flourish every now and then, coinciding peacefully with Ben's aliens and the Omnitrix without having to choose one or the other. And like I mentioned from the previous season, the episode Lucky Girl was a great way to finally give Gwen the spotlight, and so the fun of the story only gets better when you throw in a new and interesting villain like Charmcaster along with Ben's newest aliens. Hex and Charmcaster's goal is to recreate the destroyed charms of Bezel using the Keystone, and to get the Keystone, Charmcaster pretends to double-cross her uncle and appeal to the Tennysons, and once she successfully convinces them, she uses that opportunity to steal the Keystone from Gwen. Just as they're enacting the final stage of their plan, however, we really get to see just how manipulative and deceptive Charmcaster really is as a character, because she ends up actually double-crossing her uncle and trying to take all of the charms for herself. We also get to see a really sweet moment where Gwen is feeling upset due to the loss of her powers again, but Ben cheers her up by saying he needs her help and that she doesn't need her magic powers to still be helpful. We also get to see Ben use the hoverboard that Tetrax gave him while his Omnitrix recharges, something that we unfortunately don't get to see again after the original series until 3 shows later in Omniverse, which is upsetting because the hoverboard is one of the staples of the original series going forward, and that's on the cutting room floor after the show finishes its run. In the end, the charms are destroyed yet again, and the Keystone is depleted of its power as Charmcaster and Hex are taken into prison. Or at least, that's what Gwen believes, because it's hinted that there might be some power left in the stone after all. I touched on it earlier, but it's great seeing Ben and Gwen working alongside each other so closely. Their relationship has come a long way since season 1, and especially since the Camp Fear episode, and that'll continue to evolve with the franchise in a very positive way. Fun fact, for my Omnitrix Awakened comic, I gave the 15-year-old Gwen the Keystone of Bezel as a necklace in her design, just tying things back to episodes like this and bringing everything full circle. In the episode They Lurk Below, we get another underwater outing for Ripjaws, and we meet a few interesting characters along the way, fleshing out Grandpa Max's backstory even further. It ruins the excitement a little knowing that right from the start, if the setting has water, Ripjaws will always be involved, but that also works the other way too, giving Ripjaws the spotlight he deserves since he can't be used too often in most of the show's settings. I'm sure they could have come up with a few more interesting ways to work around the needing water to breathe aspect, because these are some of his few remaining appearances. We're only on season 2, and he only appears in 4 out of 26 remaining episodes, and he's not even in season 3 at all. Put some respect on the fish, man. The episode introduces 2 characters, Donovan Grandsmith, voiced by Tom Kane, and his grandson, Edwin Grandsmith, voiced by Kath Soucie. I of course had my issues with the episode Ultimate Weapon due to Max's characterization, but this episode in particular definitely ranks worst in the season. It's not bad, it's just a very side-questy type of story, and the lessons and morals don't particularly involve our main characters, rather it focuses on the relationship between Donovan and Edwin. 2 characters that, by the way, never appear in the franchise again after this episode. Not one single appearance or mention by other characters, which is a shame, especially because Edwin was able to deduce Ben's secret, making him one of the few characters that knew his identity before it was revealed to the public at the start of Ultimate Alien. The basic plot involves robotic squid aliens terrorizing Donovan's underwater resort after Donovan had stolen their energy core to create the resort many years prior. The robot squids are from space and crash-landed on Earth many years ago, actually being the direct cause of the Bermuda Triangle disappearances that fueled the urban legend over the years. The group opted to blow up the energy core to prevent the squids from obtaining it, assuming that they'll continue to terrorize the ocean, but on a larger scale. And sure, the aliens have been causing a little bit of tomfoolery, but all of that, as far as we can tell, can be attributed to them A, protecting their crash site underwater and protecting themselves from any outside force, and B, trying to get their energy core back. Now, to play devil's advocate with the group's thought process, the assumption that they'll go out and continue to cause havoc does make a little sense, but at the same time, they're really just protecting themselves after being stranded on a, to them, alien planet. It's kind of understandable that they'd be hostile and protect their new home. And you know, with that in mind, I think it could be a great lesson for Ben to start learning about other alien life. I mean, maybe they were the sole survivors of their planet's destruction and are the last remaining. He blows them up. They're dead. The next episode, Ghost Freaked Out, is another iconic episode in the franchise and holds a top spot amongst many other episodes throughout Ben 10 as a whole. It's an extremely important and impactful episode, and the plot specifically is one that the writers have been planning for a while, and actually since the very beginning stages of the show's production. And the revelation in this story introduces one of Ben's greatest and most dangerous villains. We start out with Ben as Wildmutt, saving a little kid from a tree, only something strange happens. Wildmutt talks. Things go from weird to scary once the boy's appearance begins to shift into something we're all too familiar with, as Ghost Freak's eye breaks through the boy's innocent appearance as he begins merging with the tree, scaring both Ben and 7-year-old me. I'm not afraid to admit it. That stuff is scary. Ben wakes up screaming, and the whole thing was just revealed to be a nightmare. Nothing to worry about, just a bad dream. The trio are on their way to Bancroft Academy, a private school that Gwen wants to attend. I'm glad the writers decided to give us a creepy old school as a setting for this episode because it's very fitting for what's to come. I mean, just imagine if the events of Ghost Freaked Out happened at, say, a beach or a Mr. Smoothie. Nah, choosing a creepy Victorian school for this episode was definitely the way to go. During the tour, Ben starts hearing voices and hallucinating. Most likely nothing, so no need to worry about it. Also, I have to say that they definitely nailed the snotty, uptight prep school stereotype with the tour guide. She is so obnoxious, and you really feel bad for Gwen with the constant judgment. Gwen is extremely excited and appreciates all the high-end equipment they have, but this rude 10-year-old just keeps giving her shit. Come on, let her be excited about something. Her cousin has a watch from space that he gets to have all to himself, but you won't let her get excited about an electron microscope? Also, why is this random kid in charge of admissions? When I was younger, this somehow made sense to me, and I didn't question it. But the more you think about it, the more you realize that they put this little kid in charge of touring the campus and admissions, because she keeps talking about how poorly Gwen is doing, and that it's reflecting bad on her application. Who gave her this job? To make things worse on top of Ben's paranoia and Gwen's bullying, it turns out Grandpa Max is diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer. Alright, maybe that last one didn't happen, but still, with the way things are going, you'd honestly expect something like that to happen. But instead of one cancer, we get 3, when the circus freaks show up in an attempt to steal from the school. You remember the circus freaks from the Zombozo episode, long hair, bad breath, and nail clippings. Ben uses the Omnitrix, but transforms into Ghost Freak unintentionally. On the surface, it could just be one of the many mistransformations that Ben experiences all the time. But with what's happened so far in the episode, and with what we all know is to come, it was definitely not just an accident. Ben, or more accurately, Ghost Freak, then gives the circus trio a beatdown of a lifetime. He is bearing no expense in making sure these guys have lasting injuries. We then get a
Not here.
and yeah, I need new pants. The Omnitrix begins to time out, and Ghost Freak begins panicking, saying he doesn't want to go back. Ben turns back to normal and is glad to be rid of Ghost Freak for the time being, only for Ghost Freak himself to appear next to him, fully real and fully terrifying. Yes, you heard that right, one of Ben's transformations has a consciousness of his own and is now free from the Omnitrix. Ghost Freak explains that the consciousness of an ectoneurite, his species, can live within the DNA itself, and that he was trapped inside when his DNA sample was taken. This is just awesome. There is no other way to describe it. It's just awesome. The reveal that Ghost Freak has been conscious this entire time within the Omnitrix and little by little has been trying to free himself over the course of the series, something that was hinted all the way back in his first appearance, is a fantastic display of writing, the kind I elaborated on and praised heavily during the Season 1 retrospective. Ghost Freak then does, well, this. And come on, man, I just changed my pants! So yeah, Ghost Freak reveals his true form by shredding his outer layer of skin apart, giving us this masterpiece. He explains that he needs to become whole again, but needs the Omnitrix to do so and plans on possessing Ben's body. However, Ben is able to escape thanks to sunlight, since Ghost Freak's true form is dangerously receptive to it. He He's more powerful after shredding the layer of skin and revealing his true form, but unfortunately it comes with a huge weakness. Why did he do it then? Well, it can be assumed that in order to possess people, he needs to be in his true form, thus necessitating the removal of his outer skin layer. That is just an assumption, but because the transformation of Ghostfreak can be in sunlight, this is most likely the case. Because when you really think about it, why have an outer layer of skin at all if it wasn't going to be useful in some way? That has to be the reason for it, and I've actually seen some debate within the Ben 10 community over this, so hopefully that explanation clears it up. From what I've gathered, a big assumption is that the Omnitrix simply helps the transformation of Ghostfreak be immune to sunlight, and that he was always meant to burn in the sunlight. I think this is an incredibly false assumption since the Omnitrix does nothing to keep, say, Ripjaws alive when he lacks water. That's just not in the Omnitrix's capability, at least at the time of the original series when the Omnitrix was very hands-off when interfering with the actual makeup of the aliens. But to be clear, it's never explained concretely in the show and never really given an in-depth answer, so I don't want to say I'm 100% correct, but hopefully you can see where I'm coming from logically. Let's try not to think too hard about it. Ghostfreak finds his way to the Circus Freaks where he forces them to work with him after threatening them, but also promising that if they serve him, they'll be able to get rid of Ben Tennyson forever. With the Tennysons tracking Ghostfreak, night falls and Ben transforms into forearms in preparation of the fight. The Circus Freaks terrorize the school grounds as bait, luring Ben in so Ghostfreak can possess him. Fortunately, Ghostfreak can't possess him while he's in his alien form, and with Grandpa Max using an old plumber weapon called a sun gun, Ghostfreak's efforts are challenged. Unfortunately, however, Ghostfreak is able to possess the Circus Freaks, and while inside someone's body, he is completely immune to sunlight. Ghostfreak eventually possesses Gwen and threatens to kill her just as Ben's Omnitrix times out. Ben surrenders, but just as Ghostfreak attempts to merge with him, the Omnitrix recharges and Ben is able to save himself just at the last second. The fight eventually leads to the clock tower of the school, and luckily they were able to hold off Ghostfreak for just long enough until the sun begins to rise. So Ben lures Ghostfreak into the window of the clock tower and he lights a flame, disintegrating and disappearing forever, with a little asterisk next to forever. The episode then wraps up with yet again another Ben and Gwen moment where their rivalry continues to soften, and Ben continuing to prove just how much he genuinely cares about her, even if he was giving her a hard time throughout the episode about attending the school. This episode was a very impactful one, if not for the franchise, then for the show in general, because Ben losing Ghostfreak is an important setup for future storylines in the following season especially. The episode is also quite entertaining, giving us a brand new dynamic between Ben and one of his aliens, something brand new to the franchise, along with giving us a terrifying and memorable villain. The episode ranks quite highly on my list of episodes, and it's easily one of the top 3 of the season, if not for the show as a whole. People who have had Ghostfreak as their favorite alien might even love this episode more than anything just because of the interesting and unique story at play. Regardless though, I think that we can all agree that this is one of Ben 10's best outings. The next episode, Dr. Animo and the Mutant Ray, gives us another very impactful episode, and one that changes the fanbase forever going forward. Not only is the episode entertaining, but the overall plot, while good, takes a backseat simply due to the incredible concept the show throws at us. In the episode, Ben tinkers with the watch in an attempt to not only find out more about it, but to also try and unlock more aliens, only to end up accidentally breaking the faceplate off of it, causing it to malfunction and give the fans a treat while taking Ben on a joyride. The faceplate, which of course helped select the DNA, now emits a strange energy that mutates anything around it within a close vicinity. With the Omnitrix itself now broken, it seems to be stuck in the middle of the animation it would make when swapping between the aliens using the faceplate, which means it's pretty much always stuck between selecting 2 aliens, creating a fusion. When attempting to transform into forearms to fight off Dr. Animo, it transforms into the very first fusion of the franchise, Stink Arms.
Ben, you're...
Stink arms? 4 arms in Stinkfly's body?
The result of the fusion merges Stinkfly and Forearms with a few side effects to go along with it. Due to Stinkfly's DNA, Stink Arms isn't nearly as strong as Forearms is usually, and on top of that, because he's very heavy, his wings aren't able to support his body nearly as well, meaning he can't fly, but rather he can only leap and hover before crashing down. I like to think that some fusions are inherently a good idea, but this episode mainly shows the drawbacks of them or how difficult it is to work around the fusion itself. After the fight, Dr. Animo finds the broken faceplate and begins enacting a plan to create mutant, alien animal hybrids using it, on top of transforming the entire planet into alien mutants. Dr. Animo then uses the energy from the faceplate to mutate a bat into a giant heat blast bat hybrid, which is insanely cool. The design of this creature is incredible. I always love fire powers, so throwing in a giant giant bat with flaming wings is just too good. We get to see another alien fusion, a fusion between Diamond Head and Gray Matter, Diamond Matter. He's small and much weaker than Diamond Head is typically, but is able to use his body and crystal projectiles in unique and creative ways thanks to the increased intelligence of Gray Matter. When they finally reach Dr. Animo, unlike in the episode Gwen 10 where it was lackluster, we get to see an incredible and badass alien transformation of Grandpa Max after he's mutated by Dr. Animo's mutant ray.
That's the cutest fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Alright, maybe badass was underselling it a bit, I apologize. The last fusion we see, unfortunately for Ben, is a fusion between Ripjaws and Heatjaws. Due to the heat coming off of the Heat Blast portion of the body, Ben is hardly able to breathe and is constantly under pressure from overheating. Needing to help the Ripjaws half by going underwater, it negates the fire created by the Heat Blast half, an all-around awful experience. Ben is able to get the upper hand in the end, and with Gwen's help, they're able to take down Dr. Animo and save Grandpa Max, with Ben firing the ray at him again in an attempt to reverse the mutation by putting the faceplate in backwards, which, in kid logic, makes absolute perfect sense. I also love to listen to Ben talk about how this was all his fault when looking at Grandpa Max's mutated form. The scene is just very sad because you really do believe he genuinely feels awful about everything, and Steve Blum plays it beautifully.
You okay?
Yeah, but I wish we could say the same about Grandpa. You were right about everything, Gwen. I just wish I could take it all back. Reverse everything I've done.
The two also don't know if they're going to be able to fix Grandpa Max, so it just adds on to the sadness even more. After this though, Ben is able to restore the Omnitrix by placing the faceplate on the Omnitrix badge as it times out, which causes it to reattach itself when transforming back into Ben, putting everything back to normal. I of course can't talk about this episode without talking about the DNA Lab, an online game of sorts where you could use codes found in Ben 10 toys to create alien fusions, all drawn by Thomas Perkins. Most aliens are represented here from the time of release, with Ripjaws and Gray Matter unfortunately being unavailable, which sucks because we see both of them having fusions within this episode itself, and Thomas Perkins even released a few Gray Matter fusions that you may not have seen. I remember spending an unfathomable amount of hours on this game as a kid. I bought all of the toys specifically for the codes before realizing I could just find them all online. After which, I went through each fusion multiple times because I absolutely loved the idea of alien fusions. And so did most of the fanbase, judging by just how prevalent fusions seem to be within the community. This isn't a recent thing either, because from the very premiere of this episode, it changed the landscape of the fanbase forever, and everyone was talking about fusions back in the day. While still on the topic, here are some fusions from the DNA Lab itself that I'm pretty partial to, that being Diamond Head and Accelerate, Ghostfreak and Heat Blast, and Stinkfly and Upchuck. Look at this guy, super cute. Probably smells awful. There's plenty of others, and as I said, most aliens are covered. But while on the topic of fusions, I did want to share a few that I have personally designed, that being Ghostfreak and Gray Matter and Ripjaws and Forearms. These were just a few that I thought would make really interesting combinations, and I wanted to see what I could come up with since I knew I'd be covering this episode in particular. I hope you guys enjoyed them. I worked hard on making each one fit the original series' style, while also respecting the themes of the fusions we've seen and trying to make it appear as if we would actually see it within the show. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see me design more fusions. I might just end up making a shorter video on the topic in the future and sharing some newer designs, along with explaining my design process, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. Also, in the comments, let me know your favorite fusions from the franchise in general, because with so many combinations and with so many aliens unlocked in the future, a ton of incredible fusions are possible, and I'm sure everyone has at least one that they're very partial to. We've reached the finale of Season 2, and it has been quite the adventure thus far. We've had so many incredible, interesting, and unique episodes and stories told throughout the season, bringing everything up another level from the first season and really expanding the depth of the universe. Ben's rogues gallery continues to increase as more and more interesting villains are introduced, but there's two in mind that can never quite be topped in my opinion. That is, of course, Vilgax and Kevin 11. Strap in everyone, because we have reached my favorite episode of the entire franchise, and an episode that means the world to me. Back with a vengeance. After the events of the Season 1 finale, Vilgax is stranded in space, frozen, most likely being launched into Earth's atmosphere after a ship blew up, where he's been trapped in space near Earth ever since. Arriving back home to Earth, we see Kevin 11, who is now in control of the spaceship that he and Ben were abducted by earlier in the season. We can assume that since Kevin is in charge of the ship, Technorg is unfortunately dead. Rest in peace, you beautiful Detrovite. Finding Vilgax in space, Kevin unthaws him from his icy prison, and the two begin fighting, of course, until Vilgax recognizes that Kevin is an amalgam of all the aliens that Ben had access to during their fight back in Season 1. He He rightfully assumes that Kevin has some connection to Ben, and the two quickly hatch a scheme to get revenge on Ben and steal the Omnitrix in the process. And of course, since the number of bosses has doubled for Ben, you can't leave him without a little bit of a power boost. While messing with the Omnitrix, seemingly learning very little from his previous attempt, Ben accidentally enters the command for Master Control, allowing him to transform into any alien he has available at a moment's notice with just his mind. All he has to do is think about the alien he wants, and he'll transform in an instant. Along with that, there's now no time limit on his transformation, so he can stay alien indefinitely. All in all, Master Control is the Omnitrix at the height of its power, so having Ben unlock it as he's about to face Kevin and Vilgax, two of his greatest enemies at this point, really says a lot. It also makes for one incredible episode and some really creative set pieces and action sequences. Ben even starts using it to make money, giving tourists rides around the area, and while obviously he shouldn't be using his powers to make money as it's not using it responsibly, at the very least he's making money in a genuinely honest way, helping people out in the process and not, say, robbing them or banks. And we know that Ben wouldn't do that, but my point still stands. But Grandpa Max rightfully explains that just because Ben can go alien doesn't mean he should go alien, a lesson that'll come into play later on in the episode, but more importantly, during a very crucial episode during Season 3. With the Omnitrix constantly active, Kevin and Vilgax have no issue locating him, catching the Tennysons by surprise. Vilgax is surprised to learn, however, that Ben has gained new control over the Omnitrix and is much more capable than during their previous encounter, so simply de-transforming him by pressing the badge won't work anymore, as he can just transform again instantly. While Ben stalls the duo, Grandpa Max recovers the Null Void projector from the Rust Bucket and intends on sending both of them to the Null Void. However, in the process, Ben is pulled inside with them and we get to see the Null Void for the very first time.
Hot diggity dog! This place is magnificent.
We get a full view inside of the Null Void with random rock structures and formations stretching infinitely throughout, along with a dark and mysterious purple void swallowing the entirety of the scenery. The best way to describe the Null Void is desolate. There's not too much going on, but what is very interesting. It's void of life as it should be, except for a very few inhabitants here or there, like these Null Guardians, creatures that live inside of and protect the Null Void. With Ben on the run inside of the Null Void, we get to see plenty of creative uses of Master Control, with Ben transforming into most of his aliens in order to get away from Vilgax and Kevin. I think my favorite part in particular is when Wildvine uses two of the Null Guardians and his stretchy vine arms to propel himself like a slingshot into a heat blast transformation. I know Ben is only 10, and he's typically regarded as being not too intelligent sometimes, but he's becoming a natural with his aliens, and this sequence just proves it. He's able to efficiently and effectively transform into the exact alien he needs mere seconds apart from one another, and takes on a horde of Null Guardians all while running from Vilgax and Kevin. That takes a lot of skill, quick thinking, and intelligence, and while Ben might not be the brightest, he's still pretty smart, and this whole sequence just proves that, on top of proving just how talented he is with all of these alien forms. And really, this scene right here serves as the culmination of everything we've seen thus far in the entire show, and it's a great payoff. While Ben is on the run, Grandpa Max equips Gwen with plumber gear as he monitors a semi-functioning Null Void projector. It's a race against the clock to find Ben and bring him back to the portal before it seals shut and the projector is destroyed. They do find each other, and Ben gives her a huge hug as Stinkfly, which is really sweet. Unfortunately, Kevin ambushes them while traveling back to the portal and holds Gwen captive, even crushing her hand at one point. It's funny because when you think about it, Kevin goes from crushing her hand in the original series to holding her hand in Alien Force, and they say romance is dead. Ben disables the Master Control so it can't be used by the duo and surrenders to save his cousin, an incredibly noble sacrifice that just proves how much Ben truly cares about her, sacrificing everything just to keep her safe. Vilgax and Kevin then pin him down and use a special machine to separate him from the Watch. The process looks incredibly painful because, as we know, the Omnitrix has fused itself with Ben's DNA at this point, so it begins tearing off of him and stretching the skin of his arm and causing him probably an enormous amount of pain. I mean, you can see the tears in his eyes as it happens. The scene is just heartbreaking because obviously we want Ben to win in the end, but here he is, losing the most defining aspect of the series and something we've seen since the very beginning. Something he's been attached to since the very beginning, both figuratively and literally. I remember being really upset about this as a kid, thinking that the show might just be over at this point and the Omnitrix would be taken and that would be the end of it. That I was seeing my favorite hero lose and possibly die in the process. I was a dumb kid. As expected, Kevin turns on Vilgax once he's acquired the Omnitrix, and the two fight over it while trying to make their way to the portal. Gwen swoops in using her jetpack to also bring Ben back to the portal, and during the chaos, grabs the Omnitrix's containment pod and flees with Ben. This prompts Vilgax and Kevin to work together yet again temporarily, blocking the portal from Ben and Gwen. Gwen does the stupidest thing possible and throws the Omnitrix into the bottomless depth of the Null Void. Vilgax chases it down while Ben and Gwen narrowly escape Kevin, both returning home empty-handed but safe, and trapping Vilgax and Kevin in the Null Void with the Omnitrix at their mercy. And so the franchise ended here, and honestly, it was quite a ride. It had a great run for 2 seasons, and if the plot was going to be wrapped up, I'm glad they did it with such a memorable... Wait a minute, what is that in Gwen's hand? Well, remember when I said what she did was stupid? You may not have gathered it, but I lied. She's actually a genius, because instead of throwing the Omnitrix's pod, she threw down a large bomb that looked roughly the same as the pod, or at least had the same shape. And since Vilgax was blinded by his pursuit of the Omnitrix, he couldn't tell the difference and leapt straight into the abyss. Gwen presents him with the Omnitrix, explaining how she tricked Vilgax in the process. 100 points to House Gwen. And without the Omnitrix, Vilgax and Kevin are stuck empty-handed, trapped inside the Null Void as they begin arguing and blaming one another for their failure. The episode sends us off with a beautifully animated sequence of Ben putting the Omnitrix back on his wrist as we see all of the alien silhouettes appear around him, along with a large green blast of energy. And all I can say while watching this is, this right here, this moment, is why I love Ben 10. Ben 10 Season 2 built on top of the success of the first season and improved the best parts of the show in practically every way. We get to see new aliens, new and old villains, and unique stories tying everything together, with the theme of family being very prevalent throughout the back half of the season. Everything got better, and even the weakest episodes of the season are still far better than the weakest from Season 1, and there aren't even that many weak episodes in comparison. Cannonbolt and Wildvine are 2 wonderful additions to Ben's roster of aliens, and unfortunately he did lose Ghostfreak, but in the end, it led to a very interesting story and premise, and something that we hadn't seen before or even knew was possible. The season also introduced us to many new concepts such as Master Control, fusions, Kevin's mutant form, and even more characters from the galaxy above, stretching out the world building even further and making this season my favorite of the entire show. Future seasons have some great episodes, but not nearly as impactful as this season in particular. And with the narrative through line of caring about family, it really does tie the whole season together in a way not many others can. If you're following along with the retrospective and you still haven't given Ben 10 a try, I can't recommend it enough from this season onwards, and because of this season especially. And I give Season 2 of Ben 10 a 9.5 out of 10. I've also ranked the episodes here in order of best to worst in my opinion for those interested in seeing how they fare against each other. Now, I turn the discussion back to you all. Leave a comment down below if you enjoyed Season 2 as much as I have, and let me know what you prefer, Season 1 or Season 2. Also let me know if you disagree with any of these rankings or opinions on episodes in general, or if you agree with me. Opinions are opinions, and like last time, there are no wrong answers. And with that, we're at the end of the video. Thanks for watching everyone. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'd like to thank our very first Patreon supporter, Bang. If you want to help the channel, you can support me over on Patreon, where I post videos a day in advance, along with tons of sneak peeks regarding video ideas, Discord benefits, or work-in-progress artwork relating to my Omnitrix Awakened comic. As an example, here's my most recent design, an original series version of the Omniverse alien vampire, who I call Bloodseeker, who I also posted progress pictures of on Patreon as I made his design. You of course can always join our community on Discord to read the comic and find out more. And if you haven't heard about Omnitrix Awakened, well, it's a project that's years in the making. I tell a continuation of Ben's adventures as he grows older and matures, while still keeping the art style and tone of the classic series, while also being influenced by the first 2 seasons of Alien Force. If that interests you, in addition to joining the community, hop on in. Thank you, and I will see you next time for my Season 3 retrospective.